All right. I have some stragglers coming in, but welcome everyone to this month's Microsoft Teams and 365 Power User Group. We're going deeper into the data loss prevention. I'm Stephanie Kingsley and I'll be moderating today. And then we have Gerald Howland who is going to be presenting the content. So let's get started. All right, as you're coming in, go ahead and mute your mic. Just if you can keep it muted throughout the session, we appreciate it because the background noise can sometimes get distracting. But if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand and you can use that feature in the control panel, or you can post your question to the chat. If it's timely, we'll make sure we try and interject that question, or Gerald might try and just answer it naturally with what he's presenting. If we can't interject it into the conversation right then, we will go ahead at the end and address those questions, as well as we'll open it up for live Q&A at the end as well. So. All right, so before we get started, we always like to just take 1 minute about MyTech, just so everybody understands who MyTech is and what we do. Some people think we're a training company, which we're not. We are a business and technology consultant, a managed service provider, and we serve small to medium-sized businesses in our two branch locations, which are in Colorado and Minnesota. And ultimately, what we do is we have a proven IT strategy. It may not be the only IT strategy. We know it's not, but we know that this strategy is proven and it helps businesses achieve more value and productivity. So we work with you to understand your business goals, implement this strategy, ultimately to remove IT challenges. Because as businesses, we all have challenges on a daily basis. And if we can remove the IT ones, you can be more adaptable to the other challenges that you have on a daily basis. So ultimately, we make IT easy for our clients, and they will achieve 4 times more value and productivity from their IT investments. If this is something you're interested in, raise your hand, let us know. We'd love to have a conversation, but that's not why you're here. You're here to learn more about Microsoft 365. So let's just dig right into the content, and I'll hand it over to you, Gerald.
Thanks, Stephanie. So one of the things that we like to start off with is, you joined a power user group. So what is a power user group in this scenario? We like to kind of clear this up and make sure that we understand these are not administrators. So the intention is that we're not going to walk through all the background actions. We'll show some of the screens, but we aren't going to. This is not a tutorial for an IT person to follow. The premise behind this is really to teach our clients the pros and cons of what we're trying to do. They're the ones that understand their organization the best, so they understand the needs, they understand what's going on, and as we approach and as we work through that, we can help make those IT decisions together and make sure that we're making the right kinds of decisions. So this is somebody who really drives that adoption and that ownership of how that technology gets implemented inside their organization, and knows what the pros and cons of, if we're going to do this way, that's going to impact the business that way. We need to make sure that we do it a different, we structure things a little bit differently for your business. So yeah, this is not an admin type course. This is not training for anything like that. We're going to go pretty high level. We'll show how the user actions work. We'll show how some of those settings are set, just so you can get an idea of what kinds of actions are done in the background. But yeah, a power user is not somebody who is behind the scenes doing all the admin work. These are not IT type functions. So one of the other things that we like to do is, if you haven't been attending all of our sessions, I'd like to kind of talk about what we've covered in previous sessions. So we've done all sorts of things around how files are stored in Microsoft Teams and SharePoint, the collaboration usage, guest access, the fundamentals of how Azure Active Directory, single sign-on, security, all of those kinds of things happen. And that's the fundamentals of a lot of the Microsoft 365 platform. Once you know that kind of stuff, now it starts making sense for you to get into a lot of the technologies that we're going to be talking about today. This is part 2 of a two-part session. Part 2 of a two-part session. Part 1, which we talked about a couple months ago, was about data classification. So actually spending the time developing policies, the structures, actually identifying how you create identifications or structures around what kinds of data you have inside your organization, so that we can build the appropriate rules, structures, protections that we'll be talking about today. We also started getting into some of the fundamentals of tags or of sensitivity labels and how they impact things. We're going to get far deeper into that today and show really what the security mechanisms that come out of that are as we go through this. So if you missed the last session, make sure you check out the link in the chat. Stephanie will be posting that there for you so that you can have a chance to see how we approach all of this. One of the things that we're talking about here is the Microsoft 365 suite. I'd like to kind of show this breakout of what features that we're going to be going through. And the reason why I like to do this is the functions that we're going to be talking about today are included by default in these highlighted areas in the Business Premium and the Microsoft 365 set. If you have Office 365 or any of the lower business packages, many of these features can be added in, but there are additional costs, there are additional licenses, and most of the time, by the time you get those additional licenses, you're at the same cost of getting the Microsoft 365 suite, which gives you a lot more features besides just the ones that we're going to be talking about today. We are also going to be covering a couple of things. We'll make sure to point it out that are only included in the highest level of service, which is the Microsoft 365 E5 license. So as we talk about that, that will be a good thing to kind of cover and make sure that I'll make sure I call that out as saying these are functions that are only allowed in that, just so you don't get your hopes up too much about the features that we're going to be talking about.
Hey, Gerald, can I stop for 1 second?
Yes.
Your voice is slightly digitized. I'm not sure if there's a setting or it's just a little bit hard to hear. And I asked the audience is hearing it too. So I just want to.
Okay. Let me see if I can.
Sorry to derail you.
Here quick. No problem. Okay. Is this any better?
No, I'm still hearing it.
Let's do this one setting there. How about that?
No, that made it worse.
Okay, then. Let me try changing mics here quick. How about this mic? Is this any better?
That's much better.
Okay, we'll go with this mic then for now. Yes, thank you for pointing that out, Stephanie. So yeah, when we one of the things I want to do is I do want to kind of take a step back and briefly kind of review the actions that we talked about kind of last time, and just so we have kind of a continuity of information as we move forward into the areas that we're going to get into today. So what is data classification? Why do we want to do this? The big thing is really understanding what data means what to your organization. So understanding where your valuable information is, understanding where your risks are, and ultimately this comes down to doing due diligence and due care to make sure that you're actually protecting that sensitive information that your organization has. If you have credit card numbers inside there, are you following PCI? If you have social security numbers, are you following any state or federal regulations around that? If you have health records, are you following the HIPAA kind of rules? Just making sure that all of these processes happen as you go through this. Some of the basics around data classification is we want to break those down, but we want to think about this is not like a security protection, right? We aren't talking security in this scenario. We're talking about what kind of data and what that means to your organization. It might mean that multiple people that normally don't have access to things actually do get access to stuff, or that people that should have access to that don't get access because they have, credit card information. Just because you're in finance doesn't mean you need access to all the credit card information. Maybe there's only a select number of people that do. So we aren't talking about necessarily permissions. We're talking about the type of data and the risk associated with that. And then you also want to think about regulatory rules. Do you have, in particular, reporting rules, protection sets? Do you have things that you have to be able to communicate when being audited or being assessed for some kind of protection, different types of data layouts, those kinds of things. I think that's the big trick is if you're trying to comply to HIPAA, FINRA, DFARS, whatever it might be, many times you have to be able to have a log that shows this information, and that's really what this is about also. Basic structure, you could have multiples, but really there's kind of a starting point. You have public information that is generally accessible. This is information that if it got out in the real world, it's not going to hurt your business. Internal only, this is probably most of your typical business operations. This is information you don't want out in the real world. It's stuff that is about your business. Many times it has intellectual property or things like that around it. Confidential, this is probably your HR files, maybe some of your financial stuff. These are things you don't want to get around even internally inside of your organization. You want to be able to protect that information appropriately. You don't want it just floating around on the internet. How do you protect that information? And then restricted. Many times this is your PCI, this is your HIPAA, this is your DFARS type data. This is information that is sitting up in those higher levels. When we go through our stuff today, we're actually going to show where we have 2 layers of restricted, where we have restricted for PCI and restricted for PII, so personal information. So now that we've classified this data, we have this structure built down, and we have a policy that says what kind of data fits into each of those. Now we can start dealing with how this works inside 365. So within 365, we have data classification sets that are called sensitivity labels. These sensitivity labels are a way of marking documents, emails. We can even mark messages in Teams chats, SharePoint libraries, OneDrive documents. We can do all of this kind of stuff that actually marks down what, how those files get used, how those files get shared, who can access those documents, and many times add additional protections on it. We can also say, we can then default additional pieces of information to like retention policies. So we can say, how long do we want to keep that? If we have something that is marked as HIPAA or PCI, we know that we have regulatory sets of times that say that we have to keep that information. HIPAA is like 7 years. So we have to keep that information for 7 years. How do we make sure that we keep that information that even if it gets deleted, it's not actually deleted and always recoverable for that full period of time? The retention policy does that. We might also say the opposite of that. We might say that there's maybe some highly sensitive information that we don't want to keep any more than 90 days. We can make sure that that information gets purged from the system within its time period also. And then we also want to make sure that we look at, are there default layers of classification or identification that we need to put into what we're building? So now that we've kind of recapped what we've talked about in previous sessions, time to start having some fun and going into the deeper level of what we're talking about now. So sensitivity labels. Inside of Microsoft 365, there are sensitivity labels, and these sensitivity labels basically define the sensitivity of the data that is inside there. These labels are the basis of a lot of different actions that we can set. Sometimes it's as simple as just having a tag that's on that document that says, hey, this meets this level of protection, or this contains this information, without having to scan that full email. Or a full document. If we had a Word document that was 30 pages long, I don't want to have to go find where that piece of content is, or have to scan that whole document to say, is there anything in here that talks about private information where I can't send this to our web publishers or to a marketing company? I want to be able to quickly assess whether or not that document is available to be sent out to the public. If we can tag this information, somebody actually reviews that information, sets that as, hey, this is publicly accessible information. Now we can say, okay, this tag is allowing us, the protections are going to let us send that information out. Everything is going to work in our favor. We can also add content markings. So if we do have that highly restricted information, we can put headers, footers, even watermarks behind the document when it's printed or when it's viewed that says confidential information or restricted information contains PII. We can put those kinds of things so it's right in your face the whole time. And then we can add even things like document encryption. So actually encrypting the data of the file itself. So not how it's stored, not where it's stored, and not how it's transferred, but the actual file itself. That gives us a bunch of other features that really add controls to that highly sensitive information. One of the things that we talked about is that public information. So we can also say that we want justification for different kinds of changes. Maybe we have one of the sensitivity labels, we set it to internal information or internal use, but now we want to make it public. I've gone through, I've stripped out everything that's proprietary inside that document, and this is now safe to put out to the public world. We can now publish it on our website. When I do that, I need to declassify it. I need to reduce the level of the tag to make it public. And when I do that, I need to justify it. When I justify it, I can now say, I made this public by doing this information. I removed all sensitive, changes. We've done a purge on the formatting. It's good to be public. With that change, that now gets logged. So we can say, did this information, if for some reason something with sensitive information got out, we now have a log that says who made that change, when they made that change, and why they said they made the change. So we can set some of those kind of parameters. We can lock that kind of stuff down. And those reports are things that we can give to the auditors. We can look at internally. We can even build alerts off those reports or off of those logs that say, send an email when somebody does this, so that the administrators of the organization can actually determine that something like this is going on. But these labels don't do any good if we don't have the documents actually labeled. So we can also require labels. The way we do this is we flip a setting and we say, require all files to be labeled with sensitivity. If we do this, the problem is you can't save that data unless you have that sensitivity set. So this can cause a lot of user frustration. It can also cause just some experience differences. The labels can sometimes get tagged wrong. So a lot of times you're going to set default labels associated with this kind of stuff. You can say, hey, I want to say all files by default are internal only, and then somebody has to say that this is publicly releasable, or set emails to be public, because any email might be public by default if it's going to anybody externally. So therefore, that information is public unless somebody specifies that this is internal only or a higher restriction. One of the big things to point out is that we can set different labels or different defaults depending on what those actions are, or we can even say that there are some features that come across as the same pieces. So there's some trickiness that kind of comes into this, but you can definitely require these kinds of labels to be force applied and used inside the organization. One of the things that we're going to also talk about today are auto application of labels or suggestions of labels. This is one of those big warning statements. This does require that E5 license. This requires those high-end licenses. This is only for the auto application and suggestion features. This uses a lot of Microsoft's advanced AI scanning technologies, all of those kinds of neat components. But it will look for known formatting, data types, structures that exist inside of those documents, and determine, hey, even if we didn't have a required format, or maybe I need to apply this across our organization to start with, I can scan the entire environment and say, look for data that matches credit card numbers. And if it sees data that looks like a credit card number, it's going to automatically lock that document down. Even if it's in somebody's OneDrive and a Teams message, wherever it might be, it's going to lock it down to our standards. It does look at kind of some heuristics-based engines. So a credit card number doesn't have to be exactly in those formats. It's going to look for the checksums. It's going to look for the proper number of digits, the formatting, language around it. Here's my CC, and then the number. It's going to look for all of that kind of stuff to kind of determine what that information looks like. It's going to look for columns that are named CC or CCN or anything like that. And if it finds that information, that's when it's going to tag it. It can also just do it in a suggestive state, so that when we open up that file, hey, this has credit card information. We recommend that you set this to a protected state, so that restricted PCI information, so that it's not publicly available. There are some exceptions, right? So unfortunately, technology is not perfect. So if you had handwritten notes, Microsoft Ink type methodologies, special mathematical formulas that produce a credit card number, comments, headers, some of that kind of stuff. Maybe you put all your credit card numbers in SmartArt in Microsoft Word. That kind of stuff is not scannable, but it does do a pretty good job of catching most of the other stuff. It's going to catch the bulk of somebody taking a export out of your accounting package and saving it as an Excel file and having all those credit card numbers available. It will catch all of that kind of stuff. Document encryption. We talked about, how we can encrypt these documents, and this actually applies to the document itself, not the way it's stored, not the transmission of the file, but the actual file data itself gets encrypted. And when this happens, that means that you can only open it with Microsoft products, and that information is a key that is generated on a per need basis. So if you remove somebody's access control, remove their accounts, do that kind of stuff, that is going to pull out their rights from being able to see that information. It also does add an additional layer of permissions. So unlike a typical, say, Word document where you might have the ability to, if you have the ability to read the document, you have the ability to print the document, you have the ability to copy the document, you have the ability to do all sorts of things like that. We can now also enforce certain protections. So we can say whether or not somebody can say save. We can say whether or not they can say print. We can say whether or not they can copy and paste data out of it. It even goes to the level of even trying to take a screenshot, it blanks it out. There's a lot of really cool features that we can control on that. So now as we set some of that information to say, this information is proprietary, but I want to block out this information. Even in some of the more advanced settings, you can even get into the states. We won't get into it in our demos today, but the possibilities of even taking columns inside of a database and saying this credit card column is not accessible to certain users. So you can even take a certain column and block that out, which is really, really effective for being able to restrict access to different database data, centralized sources of information, stuff like that. This does require authentication in order to open the file, though. So like I said, you have to use that Microsoft Office application to open it. You have to have a valid license with Microsoft. You have to have a valid login with Microsoft in order to get that key to be able to decrypt that data.
Gerald, there was a question that came in asking if you put on form templates in Word, can that automatically set the sensitivity level?
A form template in Word setting the sensitivity level. Yes, it would be able to. Yep. So if you have a template document that has a sensitivity label that is restricted or internal settings or public documentation, you can set that, and that will apply to every document that gets created from it. Those documents or those labels do transfer with that. So even if you were to copy that file and recreate it, or if you were to do a save as, that information will stay with that document. Good question. There, of course, with all of that encryption, there probably comes some cons with this, right? It sounds too good to be true sometimes, and that is the case. So if you are going to share this data, we probably don't want to set our public labels to have document encryption where everybody has to sign in all the time. That's going to cause some problems with us. If we try to set this up and say document sharing, if we're sharing with a third party outside of our organization, we're maybe using Teams to do that, and we're setting sensitivity labels that are saying this is highly sensitive, and that information is being encrypted. There's going to be additional steps that your guests are going to have to go through. You might have to invite them in as a guest. You can't just share out the data. We might have to put exclusions into a lot of our processes and our rules to allow that data to come through the system. Just a lot of kind of exception handling, processing, just additional steps that are kind of necessary for sharing that information outside the organization. Improper configuration can cause problems. It can limit users' permissions. If you say, oh, look for this kind of data and it's the wrong format, and all of a sudden you say this is all now, anything that says MyTech in it is considered, highly sensitive. That's going to go through all of our documents, everything that we've got that's ever said MyTech, and it's going to lock it all down. And that might, restrict users from being able to see stuff or give them read-only access to everything, which can be impactful. This does affect files. Even if you have read-write access to the file, that file protection itself in the encryption doesn't give you access to do anything. And then even offline access. There are some settings that can be set to allow offline access. So if you're traveling on an airplane or synchronizing that OneDrive data, you want to be able to access that data even if you don't have internet connectivity, you can do that. You just have to think about it when you're setting up those configurations. And if you make those timeframes too short as to how long it caches that information, then that becomes a problem then too, because that you'll need to get an internet connection or to open up that document. You might have the document, you might have a copy of it, but you can't use it. And then that auto labeling can encrypt those files, remove those access. That's part of that whole process, right? That's where the auto labeling, in fact, by default, Microsoft doesn't even let you apply an auto label until you run it through a test scenario to make sure that it's not going to affect too much of your environment. It's kind of a fail-safe that they've built in because they've seen too many people just apply an auto labeling feature and then encrypt everything inside their, all the files inside their environment.
Hey, Gerald, quickly before you move on, talking about the sensitivity label again, further question got asked, what about with PDFs?
PDFs, sensitivity labels. So there are some ways to do it. They're done a little bit differently. So you don't set sensitivity labels on the actual PDF itself. There is a Azure rights management tool that you can implement that uses many of the same features, but in a slightly different way, where it actually wraps the file essentially with the encryption or with the structures that you want, and then kind of provides the protections from that side of things. So most of the stuff that we're going to show today is completely related upon Microsoft documents, but there are ways to do it. We're not going to get into it. It's some pretty advanced configuration. This is also how you could potentially encrypt and protect those documents that are also on premise. This can extend down to your file servers in your local environment. If you're in a hybrid environment, these can extend down to your file servers also. You can put these same protections in place. You can put the same controls in place. Even the automatic scanning for files can be done. It's just that there's a lot of configuration and a lot of planning that needs to go involved with that. Potentially additional licensing also.
I just said thank you.
Yep. So this is all great, right? Sensitivity labels, we can do all this encryption, we can do all this auto labeling. But what happens if we're trying to send data that's not in a document format, i.e. that PDF that we're talking about? What if I print out one of these Word documents to a PDF, and then I try to email that PDF, or I try to share that document out? That's where additional features like data loss protection come into play. So data loss protection uses many of those same technologies that we were talking about with that auto labeling, but it actually looks for the content and then performs actions based upon that. So we can actually look for not only sensitivity labels, but we can also look for content. So we can look for credit card numbers, we can look for tax numbers, and we can do these for international numbers even. So we can look for bank numbers, we can look for, there's like over 200 pre-built formats that you can use. You can also build custom formats. So if you know that all of your invoices or your account codes all start with, ABC, and then a number sequence, you can actually put that in, and you can say, always look for more than 10 ABC numbers to exist inside of an email or inside of a document that's getting shared, and block it immediately. We can do this without having to categorize data, without having to have somebody intervene with that information. We can just do it straight off the bat. This gives us the really slick abilities to be able to block, being able to send bulk sets of information. And this can be done, text inside of an email even. We'll show you some pretty slick ways of doing this. So now that I've bored you all with a slideshow, we're going to get into some demo stuff. So I'm going to exit out of this. And what I have here is I have 3 VMs that I've built. One of them is a company-owned computer. So this is emulating that I have a computer that you would have inside of your office. This is joined to our Azure AD. I've got a fancy background that shows an office. I've got a home computer. This home computer shows a home in the background. This is my computer that I might have at home that allows me to interface with the Office computer and be able to access those files, to be able to, make some changes to some Word documents, things like that. I also have a file of a good old hacker out here being a malicious user that we are going to try to keep from accessing all of our sensitive data. So we're going to start off with our Office computer. I am currently signed into 365 as a admin. It gives me access to stuff. So I am an admin. We're going to go through, kind of show off how we set up some of these policies, talk about what some of the settings are, some of the auto labeling things, and then we're going to show you what the user experience is like. So when we look at this, I've built what our label structure is. Microsoft wants to refresh for me. I've built a structure of public information, internal only, confidential information, and then we have two forms of restricted. I have PII and PCI. You'll notice that there's an order to these types of information. This basically is when we talked about being able to downgrade the information structure, that is going to a lower number. So if I have something that is rated at restricted PII, in order to make that public, I have to go down the chain or to a lower order number, which means that I have to provide justification for doing that. Going up the chain usually involves better security, less requirement for that. You'll also see that we have a grouping here. So we have one that's identified as restricted, but then we have kind of subclasses of that restricted format where we talk about PII and PCI. Now these can be categories that are kind of sub-structured. When we talked about our document classification or data classification session last time, we talked about you don't want any more than 9 of these master headings. Microsoft actually has data that proves that you actually don't want any more than 5 of them, and you also don't want more than 5 subheadings. If you have 5 subheadings underneath one of these grouped topics, they talk about the fall off of interaction and proper categorization goes significantly, it just goes through the roof. So you don't get as much interaction. You get your documents are getting improperly classified, all of that kind of stuff. The simpler you make this, the more straightforward you make this, the easier that all this is going to be. We can also apply these configurations, these labels, to different things like email, files, purview assets. We can set them up to affect teams and groups, structures, all of that kind of actions. As we develop some of that, as we set some of those up, every message now becomes part of that structure. This becomes, I only did file and email here for the most part. Purview assets, those are those Azure database type structures. That's kind of a beta feature that's in, or a public preview feature that's in play right now, but we can do these kinds of actions. One of the things that we have to do once we've developed these labels is we have to actually produce a policy that publishes these labels out to the users. In this scenario, I have a single policy that is for all users, but I might even create one that affects only a subset of my organization. I might have that in order to use the public setting, I might need to say that all users don't have access to public. Only 10 people in the organization are allowed to downgrade a setting to public. So I can actually choose what labels are effective here. And I could maybe say that public information is part of this, and this is only available to my marketing team. Or sales, one of these exists in here. So sales and marketing team. I can now say this, and now only the users that are in the sales and marketing team will be able to do this, and they'll be able to do this with justification. So now we can say that they must provide a justification to either lower or remove that label. And removing a label becomes invalid if I say that, they all have to have labels. Now, in order to just lower its classification, they need to provide justification, and it has to be labeled in order for them to produce that public document. So yeah, we can do a lot of these kinds of things. This now becomes the only way that, or the only people that can publish this information are the users, or the marketing team is the only people that can produce the public information. Auto labeling. This is where we start talking about a lot of the functions that we were kind of describing with those higher level licenses, this is the functionality where we can say, in this case, I'm looking for information that is PCI. And as soon as it meets any of the PCI DSS or the data card security type functions, this is basically going to be looking for card numbers, CVV numbers, expiration dates, any of that information in combinations. It's going to start restricting that information and blocking it. I have this currently set up. If I go in and modify this policy to look for anything that has more than a single credit card number associated with it. So even if I do this in a low level, we'll be able to see exactly where this is blocking what we're doing. Inside of here, we also have our data loss prevention. So data loss prevention, as we were talking about before, is we can build policies that watch for types of data and actually perform actions based upon this. These DLP policies are not just email. These could be files that are not classified or meet certain restrictions. So I can actually create a policy in this scenario, and exactly like we're talking about, this is loss prevention. So it's going to keep this information from being removed from the organization. I'm going to say financial here, and I'm actually just going to look for our social security number under privacy. So here's our personally identifiable information. So our tax, if we have any taxpayer IDs, any social security numbers, passport numbers, that kind of stuff, I'm going to apply this information. I'm going to say that I want to mark this as PII. And where do I want to look for this information? I can look at this information. I can even look at this information across devices. I can watch if this computer is managed by Intune or Endpoint. This will actually look across the system and look for those files that have that data. We can watch for people trying to use cloud app security. This provides protections for like Dropbox or Google's G Suite if you're not using 365. Box.com. There's a lot of different structures that this will keep that information from exfiltrating out of. Even databases or we were talking about the on-premise repositories, we can watch for that kind of stuff all internally. In this scenario, I'm just going to turn all of these off except for OneDrive and my Exchange email. I'm also going to apply this to everybody. So I can choose that I want certain people, or like we were talking earlier, this, some of these encryptions or these protections can cause problems with trying to do legitimate business. Maybe I need to be able to send this information to my bank. In order to send that information to the bank, I might need to build an exclusion allowing me to send it to that group, or say that this person, they're the CFO of the organization, they have the ability to send this information. They're the only ones that can. And now I can put them in as an exclusion, and they can get around some of these policies. Just gonna set this up here quick. So we're gonna look for information that is being shared outside of our organization. So I can also say I only want to block it if it's happening inside of the organization, but I'm gonna say if we're sharing this outside of the organization, I want to protect this information. I can also set when certain sensitivity labels happen, what do I want to do? I can say there has to be at least 10 instances of this before I actually start taking action on some of this. I'm going to send reports. I can also restrict access. I can say, do I want to block people from being able to do things when it actually happens? And when we block, what do we want to do? Do we want to provide overrides? Do we want to say, is there a business justification for sending this information? This all goes back into our logs, which we'll show you, and we can see how we can actually audit for this information. We can also automatically encrypt this data and restrict access to it to say what it's going to be doing. And then this is when we talked about the cloud app security type thing. This is BoxG Suite, allowing you to block being able to copy and paste that sensitive information even up into those environments. We're just going to turn it on right away because it's a live demo and I'm sure we'll only screw up some of this. We'll give this a second here. Okay. So now that we have all sorts of policies around data sensitivity, data loss prevention, all that kind of stuff, let's see what we can do to break this. So I've got an Outlook inbox here. I can create a new email, and I'm going to just send an email to prove that this is working. I've got a Gmail account out there called MTP Bad Guy. So I'm just going to send an email just to prove that a straight up email message is going to go. I'm going to go over to this bad guy account, and I'm going to pull up his Gmail account. And look at that right there. Patty has sent me proof that this email works, right? I have just validated that this all happens. So anything that gets blocked now is getting blocked because we have defined to block it. I also have a set of files that I maybe have downloaded out of our HR application. I maybe have a whole bunch of HR records, or I also have something that I copied out of our ERP solution. I now have all of our credit card numbers for a bunch of clients. So I've got, these are legitimate, mathematically correct credit card numbers. I've got CVV codes. I've got the expiration dates. I've got addresses, all of that kind of stuff. Now you'll also notice that what popped up at the top of the screen, your organization automatically applied the sensitivity restricted PCI. It met all the factors that we have set up for PCI to block this information, and it's automatically applied a sensitivity label. So if I will go over here and look, it's going to show that it's restricted PCI, automatically done. This is part of that automatic scanning. This is as soon as I open up this file on my local computer. I didn't even have to save this file to OneDrive or do anything like that. As soon as I opened up this file, it automatically identified that, hey, this contains really sensitive information. We need to protect this. I did not set up anything for PII. And if we look at this in this scenario, you'll see that it's not actually recommending any sensitivity. It hasn't even identified that it needs to be sensitized at all. So this is, you know, I've got social security numbers here. I've got birth dates. I've got all the stuff that would meet anybody's requirement of what PII is. This is all sensitive information now at this point. I'm going to take this, I'm just going to take one of these credit card records though, and we're going to show you how DLP works in this scenario. So I'm going to take a single credit card record. I'm going to go back to Outlook because I think I'm going to be sneaky, and I already tried to send this out and it didn't send. So I'm going to just simple copy paste, right? Single credit card number. I'm going to send this to the MTP bad guy. Boom. While that's getting processed in the background, I'm going to go back to this Excel file, and I'm going to show you that if you look here, I grabbed one of the credit card numbers that has dashes in it. I'm also going to grab one that doesn't have dashes in it. And in fact, I'm even going to play with this a little bit. I'm going to remove some of this information. I'm just going to make it seem like it's really, really simple. But one of the things that you'll notice that when I sent this message and I said, misspelled your info, it said, hey, the information, the content you tried to share or you tried to email contains one or more credit card numbers to people outside your organization. You need to remove that before you can do this. This got blocked. This is flat out, I blocked the message. It never got there. If I go over, it's going to probably show that I'm wrong in this, but it should be blocking the message. Oh, that's interesting. So you can see that it didn't get the first one, but in this case, it actually, I was able to fool it by breaking out the format structure to a system that it didn't actually catch this credit card number appropriately. Live demo. I always find some way to break this. So yeah, we can see that we actually got this information to fall through just by changing the formatting or by removing some of this PII information. This would be an interesting test to say if I send this again with all the information, whether or not it catches it. Now, one of the things that can happen is I've built this document now that has all these credit card numbers. I'm going to say okay to this. I'm going to accept that I've now saved this document. I'm going to save this file to my OneDrive. So I've taken this, I've started working on this. I'm going to save it to my OneDrive. I now have this file up there. And this OneDrive file has got all of my information. If I go up here, I can look at client CCs. This information is there and it is being filtered up. I can also I'm going to try to share this file. I'm going to do this as an attachment now. I'm going to go in, I'm going to say a new email. I'm going to attach this file that we have done, and I'm going to take the one right off the hard drive that does not have any of that classification on it yet. I'm going to try to send this. What should happen in this scenario is data loss protection should catch the message, block it now, and say, hey, this message contains more than 10 credit card numbers. I'm automatically blocking it. You can't do what you think you can do. I'm now going to do it I'm going to use that. I'm going to send an attachment though that has all of these HR records. And we're going to see if this gets blocked also. Theoretically, it should. And while that's going on, I'm going to take this. So I'm kind of jumping around on you. I'm going to show that this sensitivity is restricted and it's restricted to PCI. By doing this, I have, and this is in my OneDrive file. So inside of here, it says, hey, this actually had a whole bunch of social security numbers in it too. I don't want to actually allow that out. So we're going to, it got blocked in this scenario. It didn't actually make it all the way through. And in this scenario, I think we actually said just to notify us. So if I go to our bad guy here, we probably are going to see it. Okay. That's interesting. I've broken something someplace that should have gotten blocked, and I need to figure out how that made it through. Yeah, cool. Minimize this here. This just shows that it's not quite as easy as it looks sometimes, and you definitely do need to do a lot of prepping, testing, validation that everything is going through.
Gerald, while you're doing that, clarifying question was the licensing level for this feature to block the email. Is this the E5?
To block emails, this is a DLP license, and the DLP license is included with all of the M SKUs, so the business premium, the any of the Microsoft 365, not the Office 365, but the Microsoft 365 do have this license. So I just sent a copy of the file that I actually had stored on my in my OneDrive that is restricted. And we can see here that this now does have this restricted document is capturing all the credit card numbers, and it should not be letting it outside of the organization. So if yeah, so it's not coming through to the end group. And we got our, oh, should say blocked up here. That's okay. Well, we'll show you that you can access this document. So if I go to home computer here, I'm going to just pull up my OneDrive via browsing. I do see one of the comments coming in is can the blocking rule be overruled by data being sent out if it's encrypted? Yes, it can be actually. So you can put exclusions in play that say this information is allowed out because of you know the protections, or because it is encrypted, it is now being ruled as it can be acceptable. You can set some of those settings in there, yes. This is a good example of what happens in the scenario that we're talking about in this case. So when I try to open up this file, it says, hey, you can't do it because we have some document protection in place. If I need to, I can say, well, let's open this up in the desktop app. In this scenario, I do have the desktop app, and this is going to launch Excel, which I am signed into. And when I'm signed into it, it's got to automatically talk to the background systems, and it's going to be able to produce the authorization for me to be able to, I'm going to just say field read only. You can see that it's saying it's configuring information rights management. So it's making sure that my computer is set up to be able to view all of this encryption information. So I can sit in here. If I did not have this file open on the other side, I could actually go in and edit this file. The document protection, some of the live edit capabilities that you've probably seen or are used to, you know, the multi-user kind of stuff, this does modify some of that so that you can't always do this. There are some, that encryption does change some things because of those actions.
Hello?
You don't get a lot of those auto saves. There are some settings that can cause some problems with this. In this scenario, we're seeing exactly that. We're seeing a read-only copy because I have it open on my work computer. If I go into my work computer and close out this file, I will now be able to open this up locally as a read-write version. So we're all in read-write version, but now you can also see down here, we can see that we're in a restricted format. My sensitivity label is set to restricted PCI. One of the other things that I want to point out is DLP was still catching this file trying to get sent, even though it was an encrypted state. So we actually have this PCI set up to be encrypted. It requires me now to have authorization to be able to access that file. And as long as the system is trying to do that, as long as DLP knows about the encryption, can see the encryption on the system, it can read this file also. So even though you're encrypting that file, even though you're protecting that file, it can still read inside of that, and it's going to look for exceptions around that process. But it did still catch it, knowing that there were a whole bunch of credit card numbers inside of here. I'm going to go back to my work computer here, and I'm going to go back into our admin consoles, and I'm going to turn off a couple of these DLP settings so that I can show you what happens if somebody were to, say, copy this file to a copy one of these files to a to like a thumb drive and actually take it out. So I took our PII, I told it to delete. So it's going through the background engine right now, and while I get this set up, it's running that deletion process. So if I go down here and I look at our HR records, I need to set this sensitivity to a PII, highly sensitive document format. And when I do that and I save this file to my OneDrive, save. I now have this file out there. If I go to my home computer, I can see in here that I can in my OneDrive, I am going to have my HR records. I'm just going to open this in the app, which is yet again going to check, make sure that I have access rights to this, and make sure that I can open up this file as I expected to. Once I do that information and I can see that I can open up this file, I'm going to actually take this file now and I'm going to go to try to send this out here. I'm going to grab these HR records from my OneDrive, and I can either do a share link or attach as a copy. I'm just going to say attach as a copy so that this file is strictly inside this email now. With any luck, our policy has been deleted. Or come on, you can send. One time the internet wants to be nice and slow for me.
That's the beauty of demos. It's always slower than ever.
Exactly. The data always goes through that you want to block, and the demo is always slower than you expect. That is my first test. I know that sometimes the AV scanning that happens with email services can slow this down, and they watch for that information. I'm going to try sharing this a slightly different way here quick. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to go to my OneDrive. I have this HR records here. I'm going to share this. And I'm going to just produce a, anyone with the link can edit, copy link. So now I have a link that I should be able to open up on my other machine. So you can see right here that it's already telling me that this document is protected by Azure Rights Information Protection, and I can't actually open this file. So I'm going to try to do one more way of doing this. Share this one more time here. This time. I'm going to give him. I'm going to block download. I just want to make sure that isn't set. Allow editing. Apply. And theoretically, I should be able to go over to my other computer here. Look at my email. My DLP policy, I don't think is moving itself fast enough. So one of the things that when we built this DLP policy, we said allow it to get sent even if it has, provide justification to be able to send. So in this scenario, what we've actually have here is we can say open the item to fix the issues.
If I remember correctly, this should ask me to provide justification. Or no, it's not. So we do have a notice on our file here that's saying that there is a problem and it contains sensitive information. So we aren't going to actually be able to do certain actions. So if I were to try to share this file now, it's probably not going to let me because of our DLP policy. Yep. So we were able to get this file here, and you can even see that Google is identifying that this is an encrypted attachment. It couldn't actually read it. It couldn't see whether or not this file is okay or not. I'm going to download this file from our Gmail. I'm going to try to open up this file. This is going to be the exact same thing as if I put this onto a thumb drive and I walked away from the company, or if my account got disabled and I didn't have access to be able to sign in and use this file. This is exactly what's going to happen. So it's going to say, hey, I'm going to configure your Excel to be able to use information management. And it's going to flat out come up and it says, hey, the account you're signed in with, which I'm signed in as myself right now, doesn't have access to open up this workbook. I'm not part of the tenant that has access to this information. This is going to automatically come in and say, you can either sign into an account that has permission to request it, or you can request access from them. And I can say add account, and it's going to ask me who I want to sign in as. And if I signed in as a user from that environment, it would let me open up the file. But by default, I can't even open up this file. If I were to take this file that I downloaded and try to open it up and look at this file in any way, you're going to see that it's just going to look like a bunch of gobbledygook for us. And it's going to just basically show that it's an encrypted data set. So one of the tricks that we use in IT is to open up this file with things like Notepad. And when I open it up in Notepad, you can see that Patty Fernandez is identified in here because they actually encrypted this data, but all the information in here is showing that it's all encrypted, and there's licenses in here and certificates that are all the pieces that are actually showing the encryption. And when you get down into this is the actual data that's been encrypted. So it's in an unreadable format. The system can tell that it's an Excel file and that it needs to gain access to get this information, but it doesn't know how to deal with it once it gets that. So this is probably one of the easiest ways to protect your data. You take all that very sensitive information, you lock it down, and now even if somebody were to take those files, put it onto a thumb drive, share it, email it to themselves, as soon as you disable their account, that information is now completely invalid. Okay. So that is the demo that I have for you right offhand. I want to be able to make sure that we do have time for any questions or comments about any of the stuff that we did, or want me to dig deeper into something. I'm more than happy to do that as we kind of go through this process.
Yes, if anybody has questions or comments or feedback, feel free to raise your hand or go ahead and post it in the chat. You can unmute yourself and just ask. If there's a bunch of them, we just ask you to use raise hand so we can go one at a time. But any questions out there? All right, looks like JG had one come through.
In this example, JG is asking, in this example, do the DLP policies actually enforce encryption on the selected files? In this scenario, I did not, but you can set it to say require encryption on that message. You can, like, the number of options that you can build is almost mind-blowing sometimes. There are limitations to it, but you can say if you are sending to an authorized subject and it is encrypted, then it can be accepted across the system in that scenario. So there are ways of doing that. If I were to go back to our environment here and look a little deeper, let me go back into data loss prevention, and I'm just going to build a new policy here and try not to set something that's going to screw up any future demos here. I still have one in here for PCI, so I'm going to look for our PCI standards. And if I set this, I'm just going to leave it on for everything here. When we get into the policy settings, oops, that's not the one I wanted. Yeah, we want to just use our DLP. We're going to use credit cards. I can go in and I can customize these processes also. So in this scenario, this is like how accurate of a system is it looking for? So in this scenario, these are also tweaks that you can do. One of the things that we were talking about is how many credit card numbers do we want to look for? We can say how many that we want to have, 1 to 9, or if there's 10 of them, then it's going to get ignored. Or I can say 1 to 999. If you're sending a whole list of them, automatically catch that. And then we can also say, what is the confidence? If you remember during the demo, we talked about certain ones got caught, certain ones did not. It's the setting that I currently have it set to is the high confidence, which means that it's basically sure that it's a credit card number. If I were to set this to a low confidence, it would catch those ones that got through because it would see that math, but it would have caught this in a different light. We can also add additional pieces of information to this. So we can also say, maybe I want a credit card number and one of these other settings. I can start building this and keep compiling multiple data sets all inside this one policy. So maybe I want to look for credit card numbers and bank routing numbers. I can build 4 or 5 different sets of data that I'm really looking for as I go through this. I'm just going to save this. And then when we get into protection actions, these are the kinds of things that we can start looking at. What do we want to do when we have the content that actually matches the policy actions? These are, we want to block this stuff. We can say, what does the email system say? We're kind of doing some of this in really short order, so it doesn't fully propagate through the system. But had it done this, like Outlook would have automatically recognized that we were trying to send credit card information, and it would have actually said, popped up a little notice and said, hey, you're trying to send credit card information. Are you sure you want to do this? And allow me to actually justify the sending of that information. I can set automatically what who gets notified of these kinds of things and what happens when that does happen. The restrict access and encrypt. Next, I want to actually set information, so I can say block people outside of my thing, and then I want to there should be an encrypt in here though. Why am I not seeing it? I probably have something set wrong someplace in here, but there should be an opportunity to say encrypt this information. It should be part right here, either block or encrypt. I will see if I can get some information about that. And Stephanie, maybe we can send a follow-up along with that.
Yep. Yeah, I just made a note.
So yeah, those are all the kinds of options that you can set. So you can set some of those forced encryptions. You can also build some exceptions around that. So you can say that if it meets certain rules beforehand, allow it to bypass all the DLP settings. So yeah. Debbie is asking, can you modify the keywords or patterns that email is blocking? For instance, we scan for HIPAA stuff. but have issues because COVID keeps getting blocked, even though there is no PII or PHI. So yes, you can kind of do some of that. So if I were to actually go back in and create a policy around data loss prevention, I'm going to go into HIPAA, which has got some pre-identified structures. And then look across all of our environments again for this data. And then we're just going to review the current ones, but we can also build some customized advanced DLP rules. And by doing this, this is where, when we're talking about being able to specify certain formats, I could say the content contains certain words. So I can actually say it contains this information, but then maybe I need to say, I can say, where is it? Add condition here. I can say I want to look for HIPAA. It's because it's already part of this one. So I need to, it's already here. So I want to modify this one. That's why. Okay. So in here, I've got my personal identifier numbers. These are the things that it's looking for. So it's looking for information that is social security number, if there's DEA numbers and medical terms. So you can start building kind of these structures. So you can say, I want this. Maybe I'm going to say, add another condition down here. Medical terms. It should allow live demo fun. Normally you could say add a condition and you can say certain rules. One of the things that you can do, and this is probably because I'm using a predefined rule in this scenario, is you can actually add exceptions also. So you could actually say if it includes the word COVID included with all this information, it actually could say no to that. Some of this will be kind of defining how exactly we want these structures to get built and what we want that design to look like. This will be able to see what that information looks like. We'd be able to build out that policy exactly to try to tweak that information to say how can we exclude certain information, or if we want to tweak it, maybe there's a special keyword that you can put in that allows it to kind of get excluded around the system. Then there is always the capability of when you say this, you can say, hey, allow them to override that capability with a justification that then goes into the logs. I'm going to cancel out of this. That does bring up an interesting topic that I kind of missed in the demo, is the audit log. So inside of here, this is actually where we can start pulling up the information about what actions are actually done. So if I look for DLP in here, let's see, it's not going to be our DLP. It's so I can start setting a whole bunch of things in here, start looking for retention label protections, actions that were done, things that were done inside the system. I'm just going to turn on all these. And we're basically just filtering out all of the audit logs, which there are hundreds of types, down to only the sensitivity label information. So when I do this, I'm going to say search, and it's looking for all of this information, and it's not showing it yet. This can sometimes have a delay in it, and I was hoping it would be faster than this, but this, whenever you set anything, you change a log, you actually identify a file, all of this is going to get logged and show up as a change to the system, in which case these audit logs, if I were to go back and just show all activities, you'd be able to see what kinds of audit logs we have in here. We can see different logins that have happened, systems that have signed in, changes that have happened to the environment. All of this stuff is inside of here. We can see any of the changes I've made here recently are all listed inside of here. Getting labels, setting labels, doing different simulations in place. All of this is logged for us. So see, JG is typing another question here.
Yeah, we'll do last call for questions here as we're coming up on, well, with 12 minutes left of our scheduled time here. And I will be sending a follow-up email after this. I'll have the recording of this session as well. So feel free to share that or follow along again if you're looking at doing some of this or thinking through how you might want to implement this in your organization. And we'll follow up with the encryption question as well with JG. And while they're typing there, I'll just talk through. We coming into the end of the year, the holidays here as well. It looks like we'll probably be scheduling another power user group in January because our next session would probably be right before the end of the year, which all of us, it's a very busy time. So we'll look to push this into January. We may be looking, depending on the the state of the health environment, this group, we've talked about possibly bringing it into a hybrid solution where we might start bringing some people in person, some folks in person and doing it virtually. Would love feedback on that if you have that, but I think some of this stuff would be great to be doing in person and just have a little bit more collaboration. But so maybe coming next year, we'll see that as well. But if you have any thoughts or feedback on that, that's always welcome as well.
I'm just going to unmute myself here. It's a little easier.
That works.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned that the encryption on the files does limit some of the collab functionality. Is that going to keep those files encrypted at rest in OneDrive, on-prem, wherever you may move it? Or how does that work out?
So the reason why the collaboration piece breaks is actually because of the encryption piece. So to kind of take a step back and look at the general idea of how the collaboration works, is the collaboration basically is a whole bunch of successive saves at high speed. So every time you make a minor change, it's saving that information up there, and then everybody else is reading that and applying those saves in real time. When you start dealing with this encryption, that constant encrypt decrypt kind of process not only is very resource intensive, but it also is prone to data corruption. And so because of that, Microsoft at this point in time is basically saying, hey, if you're going to do this, it's essentially 1% at a time kind of format. And that is kind of the reason behind why when you do these actions, it does limit some of those components. Now, what's really interesting about that is Microsoft is working on scenarios where the file gets decrypted and capable of being displayed like in the web browser. As some of those actions start happening, you're going to see those changes becoming more and more live, in which case, the multi-edit functionality is going to come back as long as you have write capabilities to that file. To the question about, is it stored encrypted at rest? Because it is actually the data of the file is encrypted. Yes, it is. So no matter whether it's sitting on something that's encrypted at rest, whether it's encrypted in flight, it doesn't make any difference because even the data is encrypted in this scenario. So that's kind of how it does this is you get a key when you request access to that file, you get a key that gives you the rights to doing what you need to do inside that file. And so if you might only get a key that gives you the ability to view that file, you don't get the key to actually write to that file, which means that's how you can kind of control those writes that are going on with that structure. That does bring up an interesting statement that, what is supported. As long as it's a Microsoft app, it is supported. So this does work on mobile devices. It works on cell phones, Macs, Linux, as long as it's the actual Microsoft apps. And many of the cloud apps do work with it too. Hopefully that answered your question, JG. Cool.
Sounds good. Any last questions? Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for sticking with us today with the live demos. There's always little glitches and things like that, but hopefully all this information was super helpful and just get you start thinking through how this could be utilized in your organization and some of the things you'll probably want to start thinking through before even starting to implement. So if this is something you want help on, feel free to raise your hand. We'd love to have a conversation with you on this. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your week, and email follow-up will be coming. Thank you.